Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Radio 5G, the hub for awakening and activation of the worldwide movement to stop the rollout of the 5G technology. My name is Michael Henry Dunn, and I'm here with my co-host, Nancy Hopkins. I want to say hello, Nancy.
Absolutely. Hello, everybody out there, and we're going to have a good show today because we've got some really amazing people.
Yes, we certainly do. The last week when Sacha Stone's stunning documentary, 5G Apocalypse Extinction Event, came out, I was riveted, watched it one sitting from beginning to end, and see it as the most powerful tool that I have seen so far that can awaken people, activate people, and present the facts in such a stunning and undeniable and compelling, not only in terms of the science of it, but the geopolitical implications and most of all the human impact in human suffering and, of course, to our very biosphere, to Gaia herself. So I immediately reached out to see if we might have Sacha join us on Radio 5G. This is, by the way, Sacha, this is only our fourth program since we started airing about a month ago. And things seem to be just rapidly accelerating. Our other guest that we have here with us today, Mark Steele, was the inaugural guest on our show. And as you can imagine from your own work with Mark, Sacha, that was just crammed with such highly credible information and details, and of course Mark's own efforts and campaign in Gateshead and elsewhere in the UK to raise awareness at considerable cost to himself. So just for the benefit of our viewers here, I'm now going to give a little bit of a background, a few excerpts from the bios that we have for both Sacha Stone and for Mark Steele. And Mark, of course, is a weapons and weapons system expert, inventor, IP writer, chief tech advisor to the Save Us Now movement. He has some 35 years of experience in weapon systems, energy weapons, and is a pioneer in the movement in the UK to bring out the facts, to wake up the people, and to halt the rollout of 5G. Sacha Stone, filmmaker, artist, former rock musician, grew up in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe throughout the War for Independence, and he established Humanidad in 1999. After conducting a 5-year diplomatic campaign, he engaged Humanidad upon both the NGO and IGO playing fields. For folks who don't know, IGO is intergovernmental organization, whereas NGO is non-governmental. As an outspoken advocate of human rights and natural justice, he has instigated peace initiatives and education programs, has lobbied against human rights abuses in different parts of the globe, and continues to prosecute for the protection of breakthrough innovators, scientists, and doctors. Sacha founded the New Earth Project, also called New Earth Nation, the world's most integrated movement promulgating sustainable, sovereign, and self-determining communities. It operates as a universal trust, engaging micronations by treaty, and exists outside of fictitious enclosures dreamt up by self-serving corporation governments and institutions. He is also founder of the ITNJ, which is the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, which launched under multilateral observership in June 2015 via a ceremonial seating and ratification ceremony at Westminster Central Hall in London on the 800th anniversary of the signing of Magna Carta. This new planetary court is committed to the dispensation of natural justice and adherence to the rule of law. The ITNJ launched the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Human Trafficking and Child Sex Abuse at Westminster Central Hall in London in the spring of 2018. Commission continues to hear witness testimonies from survivors and expert witnesses from around the globe via online virtual court seatings. It will issue a formal Commission report in 2019 for the edification of the public at large, as well as governments, policing agencies, and the military intelligence community, all of which are variously complicit in the crimes against humanity via compartmentalized elements within their own institutions. Sacha is an activist, public speaker, publisher, writer, and filmmaker. So I wanted to read that entire thing. Welcome, Sacha. It's an honor to have you with us.
Well, salutations, Michael and Nancy, and thank you very much for that kind introduction. I apologize. It sounded very wordy, but I'm very, very grateful to be asked to join your show today. Thank you.
I was practicing the wordiness of it because it was worthy of its wordiness, I would say. I wanted to be sure.
Delightful to have Mark Steele with us. I'm not quite sure what the time is in his neck of the woods, but good to have my old friend on the line as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is a great combination. Welcome, Mark. How are you doing, sir?
I'm all right. Obviously, we've had some tribulations with the British judicial system, basically a bit of a whitewash, but nevertheless, a victory once again, because obviously we don't lose this. I was found guilty in an appeal against conviction and sentence where basically a local authority have set out to discredit me, basically a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, etc. However, the courts have come down on the Crown side. The evidence was absolutely damning. In fact, it was pretty interesting to see. In fact, some of the evidence was bizarre, to say the least. And unfortunately, the bench decided that they believed that even though the police evidence was doctored and the councillors' evidence had been shown to be wanton, to say the least, they decided that they were the more credible in the court, which was absolutely a bad day for the British judicial system, but nothing that we didn't expect. So much so that the press were there. We had the Associated Press people there. We had a number of press groups there. We came from that court. Obviously, the decision didn't go our way. However, they have not published anything. There was camera people there. Few people took photographs, took statements from me when I came out. Not one single comment. This was the first appeal for a 5G trial in the world. The Newcastle Crown Court, not one comment in any of the mainstream media at all, which tells me something very, very interesting. They are absolutely running for the hills about 5G. It's so much so they can't even put their whitewashed event, this say a charade for the criminal justice system, into print, into the press, because people just do not believe the state apparatus. They have lost all credibility, absolutely lost all credibility.
Well, Mark, what are the implications of this for you personally? How is this playing out for you?
Well, it was a Section 4. It was basically a public order offence. So I've ended up with another £600 fine added to the original fine. So I've got a fine of, I think it's about £1,300 or £1,400. So but the implications of this, these people came to my home to bear false witness testimony against me. We'd already had a civil trial where 11 local authority goons had come to my home to bear false witness testimony. That played out in a court where the mayor, where the chief executive lied, perjured themselves, where they had officers from the council came to my home, perjured themselves, was shown on a stand, was sworn under oath to lie about me, and then in the criminal case, the judge decided that the two councillors' words were to take precedence over mine and another witness, an absolute shower, a shambles. And what we need here is a public inquiry into how, when anybody speaks out about wrongdoing or criminal activity at authorities, or gang stalked, and then they are then taken to court on trumped-up charges to try and bring people in to discredit them from speaking out. An honest citizen trying to speak out in his community to protect his own community and mankind against a human rights crime that's been perpetrated against them. And you've got the local authority in collusion and conspiracy with police to actually bring innocent people to court to silence them. This is unbelievable.
Well, let me just jump in here, if I may, please, because there's no end to the outrage that Mark feels and can speak to more than anyone else possibly in the world today, considering he's facing the very brunt of a weaponized justice system, as he quite rightly points out. It's a weaponized justice system in collusion with a weaponized mainstream media machinery. And that mainstream media machinery is also hand in glove supported and endorsed by what I can only describe as a weaponized academia, which is, again, refusing to pay heed or homage to the simple scientific facts that we're looking at with respect to this insidious rollout of 5G. So when you've got government apparatus, policymakers, and the executive hand in glove with the justice and juridical systems, hand in glove with the propaganda machinery of mainstream media, and backed up by academia, where do the living men and women of the living soil go to for remedy? Where can they be heard in such a construct? And that's really what we should be discussing. It's not so 5G is symptomatic. It's a totem. It's an archetype. It's a classic narrative of how perilous we are today as a species, surrounded as we are with the apparatus of government, which is weaponized against the living men and women of the living soil. That, to me, is really the big story.
I agree very much with you on that, Sacha. And when I look at your work, as I've been researching naturally over the last day or so, particularly with the ITNJ, the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, to restore the rule of law, which has been a focus for me as well over the last 6 years. I look at all of the initiatives of the ITNJ, particularly the inquiry into sex trafficking and child sex abuse, and I can see all of the many, dignitaries, places of power where you have brought the restoration of the rule of law to the fore. And specifically, the issues that are close to my heart in terms of the elimination of the pedophilia rings and the bringing to justice of that whole dark system. It comes down to exactly what you're addressing here. Where can the people go? They can't really go to the ICJ or the ICC or even the European Human Rights Commission or the UN Human Rights Commission. These they do not have teeth. They do not have enforceability. They are not actually in a position to prevent, to help alleviate human suffering, because they will make findings and recommendations, but there is no enforcement because, of course, they are kind of designed to not mess with the system from their own inception. So I would love for us to focus on exactly this point that you raised. I mean, for Nancy and I, what we're doing, and the reason that we founded Radio 5G and the website 5G-KNOW5Gno.com is to awaken and activate people. Nancy made a comment the other day in one of our interviews. If you want to stop a movement, actually this is a quote from Wilhelm Reich, if you want to stop a movement, organize it. Right? So what's happening here when you see the good news on the horizon? I mean, the news, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Sacha, on the recent development we hear about in Brussels, that Brussels is actually calling a halt to 5G. And, and this is capital of the European Union. You would think this would be cabal central, and yet they are calling a halt to 5G. City of Portland, Oregon in the U.S. has managed to get a stay of the rollout of 5G in order to examine the health implications. So anyway, with that little intro to this crucial question of where do the people turn? Can you respond to that from the ITNJ
Yes,
standpoint?
I can. Let me just say, you state that the ICC and the ICJ don't have teeth, and of course I understand what you mean by that. But the sad fact is that they do have teeth, but the teeth are aimed at the people that they're mandated to protect and serve. That's us, the common proletariat, the citizenry. So the international juridical systems at that multilateral level are doing the bidding of the corporatocracy, of the corporations masquerading as governments. And therein lies the real problem. So, of course, people can't go to them for remedy or justice invariably. And Mark Steele's case is, of course, the most contrasted case we have to look at today in that respect. How does the ITNJ, the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, address this kind of planet-wide travesty when you're effectively looking at an apocalyptic tidal wave? It's a behemoth that is so epic in scale that it's almost incomprehensible to take on board and compute. How do you stop a $20 trillion technological rollout? With $20 trillion comes millions and millions of contracts that have been signed and sealed and wet ink signatured. The special interests, the vested interests in a $20 trillion rollout are beyond comprehension. It's impossible, in a sense, to stop that wave. On the other hand, there's something else which is emerging. You've just pointed out a couple of testbed cases of protest, Brussels being the signature case in Europe. Whether or not the mayoralty of Brussels are complicit with the cabal and actually are simply protecting the Central European cabalistic interests in Brussels as they continue to promulgate for 5G rollout, but protect the serpent's lair, so to speak, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Or is it just some kind of divine geometry that in the heart of darkness, the seed of light unfolds and we see the real protest at that policy level coming out of the heart of darkness in Brussels? I'd like to think that that's the case. I do say that we're just seeing the tip of the spear of that emergence of right action and right thinking. I don't believe that 5G is going to trigger and go global the way it's intended, precisely because I've got tremendous faith in the common pulse of humanity, being able to override that and stave off that danger in time.
Well, that is something I'm seeing unfolding as well. We had our interview yesterday with a man named Dean Henderson, who's done an enormous amount of research over the last 20 or 30 years, specifically on the money trail, specifically on the Crown, and how they operate, what the alliances are between Rome and Washington and London, as of course you're very familiar with.
Yes.
And what Dean was pointing out was that it is really action on the local level. If we can help encourage, sustain, create a worldwide movement and awakening, that I saw it here in the small mountain town that I live in here in Colorado only yesterday. You may or may not be familiar with the work of Judge Anna von Reitz here in the U.S. in restoring.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And county by county, across the some 3,500 counties, across the United States, people are taking this, careful action to restore precisely that natural relationship to the soil between us as children of Gaia and our natural sovereign rights and relationship to her. And it seems to be working, and what I can see coming down the road before too very long, especially with 5G, as you say, as an archetype, it's a trigger. It's, as Nancy likes to say, it's this story of 5G is a very powerful, compelling dynamic that can help wake people up. I also don't believe it's ultimately going to roll out. I think Gaia has already got things up her sleeve where, victory is assured, but I'm not taking any bets on it. And
we've seen it so many times, haven't we? We've seen it so many times with the human genome able to shapeshift or mutate into a different form with HIV, AIDS, and Ebola, and swine flu, bovine flu, avian flu. All of these engineered threats we've managed to overcome them, thwart them, absolutely, at the level of morphogenesis. And it is about morphogenetics at that level.
Yeah, and what do you think, Sacha, of the idea that I lost my train of thought for a moment here. Nancy, do you want to jump in do you have some thoughts at this point?
Yes, I would like him to go into the concept of morphogenics because I don't think a lot of us have a real good feel of it. Can you just give us a quick down the trail here?
Sure, I'm no expert on it. I mean, I could allude to the work of Rupert Sheldrake, who's the great academic in the United Kingdom, who's propounded the dynamics of morphogenesis or morphogenetics. But it's really the innate or intrinsic psionic intelligence that interconnects all living forms and on different frequency values, different bandwidths. So the human family, in that sense, interconnects. Through the morphogenetic field. The animal kingdom connects and computes. Birds know how to fly in extraordinarily complex arrays and move with rapid movement. 5,000 birds can all, in a flash of an instant, can all change direction as they do when they're in flight. That's a classic example of morphogenesis at work. When we're not overthinking who and what we are, there is an innate or intrinsic intelligence at work that interconnects all life forms. And the human being or the human technology being the most advanced, purportedly the most advanced creature to emerge off the surface of the earth, we have a particularly advanced and acute morphogenetic capability. So it's when the HIV/AIDS threat engineered virus assailed humanity, clearly intended to cause as much havoc against the blackest of the black genome in sub-Saharan Africa, it did take out a tremendous amount of collateral, and people died in great swathes, as we recall, those of us who lived through the 80s and the 90s. But the point is that within a few short generations, a couple of generations in point of fact, the morphogenesis or genetics kicked in, and it's got to the point where we have a phenomenon in Africa known as the AIDS, the AIDS children of AIDS, who have incredibly advanced autoimmune systems, despite the fact that they were born to parents who both had HIV/AIDS and who died. And there's an entire generation of African children who are now, I believe, in their 30s and 40s, who were born to AIDS-infested parents, and yet these people have got extraordinarily well-defined and boosted up autoimmune systems. So that's a classic example of the innate intelligence, which I could drill into that a bit further if you want, because it's connected to effectively to the microbiome.
Let me just jump in here for a second, because I have a large audience that knows the same concept but in different terms. Because when I'm talking about it, I'm talking about the collective consciousness of humanity.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the tree weave, the water weave, shungite weave, roseweed, all of these weaves of energy that connect to anything similar to it. There's a connection. It's just energy science. But what I wanted to do right now is to just applaud all of us actually, for continuing to use what they gave us, because it's another example. They gave us the internet to control us. And it's blowing up in their face because this is the way we are gaining control over our own biosphere, our own domain. We're claiming dominion again. And it is such an interesting to see how the collective consciousness right now, and I think that's what we're all alluding to, has been filled with so much data, so much, points of light and enlightenment that it's already there. And all we are trying to do is to continually fuel that super subconsciousness, but also to, in a 3D way, give them a narrative, give them a story. Because the story that's out there is ludicrous. It's like sci-fi taking, steroids. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to get a handle on that. And then when you take your work in the documentary, which I have to tell you, I've been in this for a very long time. I have never seen such an amazing presentation of the information. It was believable. It was engaging. It was compelling. It was a little bit scary, but not so scary that I thought I was going to just turn it off because I couldn't handle it and I was having a cognitive dissonance thing, So I just applaud you for that. And Mark, you're so right when you said that when you went out there and you actually lost the court case, you took a major, major jump in the mainstream understanding, wow, this is real. That because yes, the mainstream didn't talk to you, didn't put it out there. But your video when you got outside of that courtroom and you were screaming was so empowering, Mark. I hope you understand that when you go out there and you look like that, which to many people is going to look like a real crockpot. Oh my God, this guy's losing it. But to those of us that know, that was such a rallying cry. And I just again applaud you. And yes, thank you for that, Sacha. That we're all talking about the same thing. It's this magical little, connection that all life in this biosphere has. And how amazing it is. Because every time they try to do this, we'll get the internet to control them. Well, I hate to tell them, but, the internet is now in our control. They may still think it, but they couldn't possibly turn it off because they're so intricately involved in it.
Nancy, if I can,
sure.
I'd like to just touch on something connecting to the mechanics of morphogenesis or morphogenetics, which is the microbial DNA, cellular DNA. In the human body. Because if we're breaking down that energy, which you rightly call energy, the way that energy moves, the interconnectedness and so on, yes, but at the building blocks and the mechanical level of those energy forms, it's a curiosity of science that the cellular DNA in the human being is less than 1% human and over 99% microbial DNA. Cellular DNA. So the junk DNA that modern science ascribes to as being junk is actually the de facto operating system or software of the human technology. And this is where science needs to wake up and come of age. While science has been looking at such a narrow margin of less than 1% of human DNA, which is the human cellular DNA, we've been omitting to look at the 99.9% of the cellular DNA in the human body, which is microbial. And it's the microbial DNA that is likely to sustain the most damage with 5G rolling out. So when your friendly government or health authority says to you, we've conducted more or less conducted tests on human DNA and we can see that it's more or less unaffected by 5G or by Bluetooth or by Wi-Fi, that's nonsense. But they can get away with saying that because to some extent the human DNA appears to be inured to certain subtle threats. But it's not the point. The point is that the other 99% of the cellular DNA in the human body, which is microbial, is absolutely being eviscerated by those subtle radiations. And that's where the illness kicks in. That's where the autoimmune system starts to collapse That's where we see the depletion and the downgrading of the ecosphere, of the biosphere, of the ocean biome, of the air biome, of the soil biome, and of course of the biome of the human body.
Can I just jump in here for a point
Go
of
for it,
fact?
Nancy.
Because the people who were ignoring the 90% of the junk DNA, okay? That's the Western scientists. I have no doubt in my mind that they absolutely understood it. The Eastern, the Russians, they were like, "Are you people crazy?" And they looked at they looked at the 90%, and to put it in very succinct form, their conclusion was that DNA is a biological internet. Okay?
Very good.
That's exactly what it's all about. It's a biological internet that has an energy framework that allows our body not only to communicate with ourselves, but with other beings, other energies that are similar to us. But what I found so compelling, it put so much hope in my heart, was the fact that they also determined that the number one way of making DNA changes at that level is the human voice. Mm-hmm. Now think about that. We can reprogram everything. And I think that this is what the dark side is afraid of, is that we're going to come into our own powers.
Indeed, and I think that's already emerging, is it not? I mean, that quanta of the collective human heart, the awakening, we've seen that pulse of Midwest America overthrow the devil in the United States recently, and certainly there is a tremendous renaissance going on, it would seem. It's playing out in the political and social landscape in quite a technicolored way, but we are seeing an awakening of that common human pulse, and that will ultimately be the restitution of the entire species, in my view.
Well, I think it is happening, and I'll just a second, Mike. What we got happening, though, is so interesting in that every time they attempt to do something, just like you were alluding to earlier, it kind of blows up in their face. And I really think that this rush to get the 5G out is because Agenda 21 blew up in their face.
Indeed,
Nobody
and Agenda
felt it.
2030 was supplanted very deftly as a former Director General of the United Nations IGO sector. I have some knowledge of the machinations of the multilateral playing field and how the harmonization of protocols and regulations and codices are implemented and then forcing governments into compliance with these codices in order to essentially allow these nefarious and Luciferian agendas to roll out with impunity, where no official, no bureaucrat, no parliamentarian dare raise their voice in dissent against that tidal wave of policy that is centralized effectively through the United Nations. Diabolical stuff, for sure.
Well, if it has failed, how has it failed, Sacha? Can you address that? How Agenda 21 is not fulfilling its goals?
Well, because they're still entrenched in time, motion, fear, and money, monetizing time, and believing that is a premise or a basis of evolution or unfoldment. No, it's not. That is most reprehensible to the human spirit. So it is the human spirit that is awakening. I mean, I look at Mark Steele and Mark being this incredible grandfather in north of England, who is just enraged for all the right reasons at the fact that the good people of the land are being genocided effectively, and that spirit in that I see in Mark Steele and that we see now happening increasingly around the world. I mean, God knows, I don't know how many viewers or audience what kind of an audience you have on your radio show, but I imagine that 6 months from now, it will be hitting the vertical. In a year from now, you'll be eclipsing all other stations because you've tapped into the pulse of awakening. And I just think it's vital that all of our attention is placed on this. The multilateral or intergovernmental playing field is under endemic and systemic collapse, under the weight of its own generational and insidious bullshit. The Vatican complex is under collapse right now, under the weight of its own generational hubris and evil, which has prevailed for hundreds and hundreds of years, certainly over the last 1700 years since the Council of Nicaea in 328 AD. We've seen the Roman Catholic Church carve tram lines through the quantum spirit of humanity and try to railroad us into a collectivized, harmonized, collectivized Borg species. That's all failed. The fact that we're having this conversation right now is testament to that. I just don't believe that at the end of the day, governments will be able to survive their own machinations. We're seeing people all around the world awakening. We're seeing, what's being shown on CNN and on BBC is not reflective of the truth. They may give us a little soundbite here and there, a yellow vest protest going on in France, or a little Brexit march going on in London. But actually, countries, scores of countries around the world have got millions, tens of millions of people on the streets. I mean, we're reaching end of days. The great tribulation is upon us. But don't expect your friendly Associated News Network syndicated station to be telling you the truth, because they are the big problem. They are the eyes and ears of Moloch, and they've become completely weaponized. So we can't get news through looking at the television screen, alas, alack. But through networks like the one you've just set up, increasingly millions of people around the world will learn that this is where we can learn the truth of things.
Well, Mark, Sacha, let me ask you, for your documentary, for 5G Apocalypse Extinction Event, what are your hopes for that powerful story, that awakening story, to roll out, to be widely distributed? I know you're in Southern California recently. Maybe you're still there. It occurred to me that, is it possible to dream that there could be meaningful theatrical distribution of such, a powerful documentary? Do you see any hope for that? And if not, how can we help maximize the impact of the documentary?
You're very kind. In the first instance, I just want to acknowledge my editor, Guichet Soto, who's done most of the hard work on that, on assembling the film. But look, it's gone pretty viral, and we're getting on a daily basis, requests for screenings and for commercial release and so on. It's complicated. We put a film like this together over the last 5 months, and be sure it was Mark Steele coming and sitting at my kitchen table in London 5 months ago and effectively putting in front of me the circuitry, when he put the circuit board and showed us images of the circuit board of the which proves that the phased array antenna systems are weapon systems. That was the piece I needed to see, because like all of us, I've heard about 5G for a long time and was unsure about it. But Mark is the first person to have galvanized that. That's what makes this film unique, is the fact that I believe it's the first time we're really showing the hard forensic evidence, so to speak, of the fact that this is a weapon system. Whether or not the officials, local officials, or local technicians and even electricians understand this is not the issue. We know we're living in an unconscious civilization where 99% of people are functionaries in their job. There is no consciousness at work. So, they'll be installing a weapon system and even hitting the switch with glee whilst they glug on their cappuccino. But that's just a sad indictment of where we're at as a species today. How will this film move forward? I'm not sure. I would prefer it if people just did screenings at home and brought family and friends in and then sat in and communed about the subject matter, because, again, it's the awakening of that psionic intelligence when we all begin to look into one another's eyes and recognize that this truly is an existential threat. That cognition is the trigger for awakening. It's also the trigger for emancipation. So I do believe that in the final analysis, this 5G apocalypse or extinction event is almost certainly the trigger for our planetary emancipation.
And you bring up a point, Sacha, that I particularly noted that moment in the film with you, Mark, where you're showing the circuitry. And there was something you said, I'd love for you to elaborate on it if you can, where you were showing the circuitry to the camera and said, there it is, boys. Look it over. You know what you're seeing. And I got, okay, who are the boys? Well, I'm thinking, okay, other weapons, energy weapons, experts. You and I both know what we're looking at here. Could you go into that a little bit about what it was that those boys would see that the layperson would not, which, is absolutely damning evidence that this is not just some cell phone enhancing technology, but a weapon?
On the end of the antenna, it's what's called a dielectric lens, and that allows me to collimate or what's called a direct energy weapon. Now, the 868, because a lot of questions about this. A lot of people basically have tried to discredit me on this particular issue, but failed quite miserably. And we've just recently had some, let's put it a little bit mildly, spies have a conversation with somebody to tell them that this isn't, in fact, a weapon, which it most certainly is a weapon. They've tried to tell this guy it's not a weapon. What I'm going to explain to people, direct energy weapons have been around for a very, very long time. This particular weapon is masquerading as a control management system. That's what the council thought it was. But the antenna design is illegal. It's not a dipole antenna. It doesn't radiate in all directions. So the data that came with it basically says it's a basic dipole antenna. I knew that not to be the case. This is what they call a high gain antenna. And that high gain antenna, it actually calibrates itself to the next one up the street. So they work in unison to then offer what's called an off-step signal, which is basically a beam wave, a phased array radar. So it's a scanner. So the copper strip is a scanner. The bit on the top is what's called a dielectric lens, and that lens allows me to collimate a signal. Now, the reason I know this to be as a matter of fact, because we need to dispel these deceivers and people who try and discredit what that bit of equipment is, because basically they're scratching like a cat in a bag, because obviously it's not very good when your local authority and your government's throwing a weapon system out on top of you. So they're pretty panicking about this. The dielectric lens, that part of the spectrum, so that antenna actually operates at 868 megahertz, sub-gigahertz range, all right? So I knew it was long-range battlefield radar. It's very good at looking into the urban environment, so not the higher frequencies that everybody thinks in relation to 5G, because the 5G narrative is about higher frequency data rates. This is a scanner, and it operates in the sub-gigahertz because that's far better to be able to look into the urban environment on the battlefield. It's long-range radar type of signals. Very little gets in its way. Whereas the higher frequency signals can be problematic. They can be blocked, and sort of can be, not as good on the if you want to look into the urban environment. So I knew the sub-gigahertz, what it was. What made this really interesting was the 868, because the 868 is a specific part of the spectrum that used to belong to the Ministry of Defence, but is now decided to be for autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles need to have what's called a collimated signal. So that antenna ties in with the autonomous vehicle 5G collimated signal, and that's what that dielectric lens is on the top. So obviously any technologist who's putting this in believes it to be. So the guy who designed it probably thinks it's for some autonomous car. And I can tell you, he's a fool. Because what it's really for, it's a target acquiring weapon. And it was used in South Korea to target acquire wild boar in the jungle and then shoot them. That's what it was used for. It was tested in South Korea. It's in Bloomberg. Everybody can go and check that. That is exactly the same or similar technology, because 5G covers a large breadth of different technologies. The equipment I'm seeing in America, believe it or not, are molecular reactors. So I got sent, it was a US government official, sent me a document not long ago and said, this person, by the way, is an expert in telecommunications and is responsible for rolling out military equipment around the US, and said to me, can you tell me what this is, Mark? And I said, well, this is strange because obviously this was an off chance. I invented a molecular reactor, right? Just by chance. I was at a carbon reduction conference. I thought that's a really bad idea. I knew how to dissociate molecular bonds, and I thought I'll break down carbon dioxide and I'll build a reactor. So I went to Strathclyde University. Cut a long story short, I patented this molecular reactor. So this lady sends me this image and says, what is it? And I said, she said, it's not, we know it's not telecommunications, and they're hanging them up all over assets in the US. What is it? I said, it's a molecular reactor. And I can tell because they have cooler pipes, because obviously you've got to pour a lot of energy in to break down the covalent bonds, and what you don't want is your radiator to burst into flames. So you've got to have them cooled down. So it's got these cooler pipes, a lot of energy going in, and I'm looking at it, and she says, well, what does that mean? I says, well, they're going to gas you. They're going to disassociate the molecular bond, oxygen, or damage it enough so that your hemoglobin can't pick it up. So basically going to gas you. So I got that image the other week. So that's 5, and that is 5G. So 5G, most certainly, whether it be a dielectric lens to shoot you, whether it be a reactor hanging on a telegraph pole in the USA to gas you, that's what 5G is. 5G is a weapon. So this is for the spies who want to try and deceive and tell lies to people. 5G has got nothing to do with telecommunications and is in fact a weapon system rolled out by governments on top of their own communities, whether it be by accident, corruption, or other. It is an indictable offence, a crime against humanity, and we will have justice.
Well, what you bring up, Mark, touches on a news item from a couple of weeks ago. We probably all heard it, that Trump came out with his, hey, we got to roll out 5G even faster. We have to beat China. We need 6G. This is, and for the people who were thinking, the awakening people, who were thinking that perhaps Trump was going to come down on the right side of this issue, the article that I read about this was actually being supported, this idea of Trump's of nationalizing 5G in the U.S. They're trying to ban the Huawei version of it from China because they call it a security risk. Trump doing a very un-Republican thing of proposing the nationalization of 5G. And the article I read pointed out that this was going to face significant opposition both from the FCC and from the Pentagon, because it mentions, as sort of a by-the-way thing, oh, by the way, the wireless spectrum in the United States is under the control of the Pentagon. Gee, what an interesting little factoid to throw our way. Why is the Defense Department in control of the wireless spectrum in the United States? And clearly the implications are that it's just for the reasons that you're describing here, Mark, that it is a weapon system. And this brings up what Nancy and I were exploring yesterday with Dean Henderson, which I'd love to get everybody's input on, specifically who is behind what he called the 5G cull of humanity. And is there a monolithic structure? Are there competing factions within the cabal that are fighting each other? Is that all just a show to make us think that there's not a monolithic plan in place? I'd love to get your thoughts on this, starting with Sacha. Could you touch on that?
I'm somewhat reluctant to get too deeply into it because we necessarily get into a lot of speculation and conjecture. And I don't know that ultimately helps us navigate out of the morass or the labyrinth of white noise that we find ourselves in. So that's my concern. Having said that, my contention and my understanding, based on conversations that I've had with at least two respectable intelligence sources, shall we say, is that the Trump incumbency is well aware of weaponized 5G, the weaponized 5G threat. I've understood that that frequency can be adapted. So the weaponized 5G doesn't have to be a weaponized frequency. Mark, you might want to step in here.
Yeah,
but I've received very compelling intelligence that I've also studied with some of our law team, and it does appear to be very, very cogent information that you can dial it one way or the other. And the way in which it has been intended to roll out has absolutely been the weaponized frequency. But it could just be that when it does go live, it will be dialed into a different value.
Yeah, I'll dive in there because I think we need to clear this one up. Obviously, Donald Trump is a very interesting character and most certainly plays his cards very close to his chest. So the article he'd actually put out, I believe, is him playing poker. And the reason I'm pretty sure about that, without a doubt I am, I'm talking to people within the US government. They're obviously... they're quite amazed about the things, and they've been telling me things which assure me. But what I'm going to tell everybody, on the March of 26, 2019, the President put out an executive order on coordinating national resilience to electromagnetic pulses. Now, 5G can work as an EMP. So obviously, if you've got infrastructure with a lot of antennas, and I've actually hacked into your communication system, I can basically set it off as an EMP, depending on how many antennas I've got and how much power I've got in that particular vicinity. So this EMP document is about the resilience of the USA. What he's talking about here, I'm pretty sure, is 5G. That's what he's talking about. So he's absolutely done the opposite of what the tweet was, I believe, stating that he was going to be rolling it out.
And it could be, if I can jump in, it could also be, I mean, classic Trump poker, as you rightly say, Mark. It could be that he's calling out all of those vested interests to see who now runs and sticks their face in the 5G quadrillion-dollar trough by saying, we're going to win the race. Let's go 5G, let's go 6G. In a sense, it could disarm the priesthood that are behind this and expose a great many of them to the light.
Well, that is a perspective on it that I too had looked at. You know, is it simply a misdirect by Trump? And what you're describing, Sacha, in terms of having it, you know, draw out all the parties, the potentially criminal actions by the parties who want to feed at the big 5G trough. It's kind of like what Mao Zedong famously did in China. I think it was in the 50s, where he said, "This campaign across China, let 100 flowers bloom. You know, why don't all of you come forward, and if you have differences with the implementation of communist doctrine in your local community, let us know. We'll share all our ideas together." And everybody came out and shared for a few months, and then they clapped them all in re-education camps, right? Because they'd identified themselves. I hope Trump is that canny. It's difficult, when you see things like has happened in the last couple of days, where you begin to wonder if he's suffering from neurological impairment. Just yesterday, the inability to say the word origin. We need to get to the orange of this. It's the orange that we need to get, and of course they're having fun with it on, late night talk show TV. But, I hope his brain isn't under attack, such as it is. But it does bring up this larger question of the dialing up of 5G. If, as you say, Mark, it is, I think it was Sacha, you were saying that the technology that you and your legal team are looking at the intelligence seems to be pretty cogent, that it's not going to, the switch will be pushed and suddenly lethal 5G rolls out across the planet simultaneously. that as a weapon system, it can be calibrated to the needs of a certain country, area, issue, controversy, protest, whatever might be going on, while doing a general dumbing down and surveillance and even sterilizing campaign over the long haul. Is that what you think may be the case?
Yes, I do, more or less. I mean, I'm curious to know what Mark's real sense of this is. And Mark and I haven't shared notes on who we're speaking to within the U.S. administration, and we both have direct channels there. But Mark, it seems to me that we ought to be swapping notes a bit more closely. I'm glad to sense that we're both pretty much akin in our view of what's happening. I think it's an insidious threat, but I cannot believe for 1 second that Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Donald Trump will allow a macro ecocide and genocide event to take place.
I totally agree there, Sacha. I think what the issue that we have is a lot of ignorance at the very, very heart of governments across the West in relation to this technology. I don't even think that the Chinese, even though they're building this equipment and shipping it around the world, and may have some idea that it's going to spy on people, don't actually know what its real purpose is, because its real purpose, I've never said this before, what its real purpose, and I'm pretty sure about this, is to attack the ionosphere. When I've looked at some of the power outputs and the capacity of this transmission systems across the West, it lends itself to believe that this potentially a rather larger weapon than what I first thought it to be. You know, I spoke about it being an over-the-horizon weapon system where maybe these satellites that are being put up could be used to target a city in from another state. It can be that. However, when I've started looking at the capability and the power density and the amount of power that's been allowed to be hooked into these systems, there is the potential that this could, the aluminium in the air.
I'm going to break up. Sacha, can you turn off your mic, please? Because I want Mark to really say this to us again, because you're seeing a system of which you are very, very, very an authority. Nobody's going to dispute that, or should. And you're seeing that it may be even bigger than anything any of us are seeing?
I've started doing some research into the powering up of some of these antenna systems and the capability that they potentially do have in unison with each other. And consequently, that leads me to believe that there's possibly another plot. You tie it in with the aluminium in the air, where you could actually potentially take down the ionosphere. And if you take down the ionosphere, then what's going to happen? You're going to open up the whole of Earth to these cosmic radiation exposure levels, which would be catastrophic to all life. So this wouldn't be an agenda where anyone would survive. And I do believe this is where it takes basically a leap of faith into the spiritual, because who would plan and want to kill the whole of life? I mean, all biological life. This would terraform the Earth to something that would look like Mars. And who would plot and scheme that? Now, and the reason I've come to this, I've been looking at some of the larger arrays, the 400,000 what we call MIMO tanks that are rolling out across the United Kingdom. 400,000 tanks. These are large transmitter, high gain, phased array antenna arrays. They're basically radar across a small country like the United Kingdom. These antennas have an elongated tat. They have cooler boxes so to keep them cool, because the amount of power they're talking about putting in. And I did some calculations, and if you had a full 5th generation, so fully blanketed country of 5G, you'd probably be using about 15% or 20% of the capacity of those antennas. What's the other 80% for? Because it just doesn't make any sense having to have a device with that amount of energy unless it has some other purpose. And I believe the purpose, potentially, is to take down the ionosphere and destroy all living things.
Well, that would have to be, what choice does one have in trying to understand an agenda like that? Who benefits? It would have to be an off-planet entity that would benefit.
A methane-breathing Draco-reptilian species would probably find a Martian landscape quite habitable, actually, if we get into that conversation.
Yeah, let's let all the methane out of the permafrost.
The capacity of these systems and the capability to break down molecular structures. So, you break down your ozones, and it to me the stupidity of it. And these people are pretty stupid, by the way. The stupidity of it, but someone, whoever's driving the agenda, the ideology, let's say, behind it, the hidden hand. There's more to it.
I mean, it's also, consider that 5G is what is going to support if it doesn't already exist, and there are very credible ideas out there that 5G has actually been implemented since the mid '60s or thereabouts. And subspace quantum broadcasting capability has almost certainly been known to compartmentalized elements of the military-industrial complex, shall we say, for some time, which is probably why they allowed the hemorrhaging of the internet into the public domain, because they already had a carrying capability, a quantum carrying capability for their own communications, which was so in advance of the more pedestrian internet. But 5G is what supports the new quantum financial system, which is ultimately set to replace the BIS and the fiat central banking system. And this is very important to understand. So 5G is a spine that can support the blockchain technology systems and the new emergent cryptocurrencies as well. So it's not just about gaming and about telecommunications. It's also about, if money and banking is all about the harvest of humanity at that kind of energetic level of harvesting time and motion, the energy, the life force of humanity, then the implementation of 5G as a means by which that harvest of humanity can be taken to the next level is explicit. It makes a great deal of sense. One should consider that.
And this ties in, Sacha, to when we're talking about the rollout of the quantum financial system, which, of course, many people are looking at as a boon. It's the great longed-for global currency reset, and everybody makes billions out of their long-stored Iraqi dinar.
Yeah.
Do you see that as, does that partake in any way of freedom movement dynamic, or is it simply a reboot for the powers that be? It's being cast, of course, as, we're going to take down the pedophilia ring, we're going to take down the central banking families, and then, all the sealed indictments will put all the bad guys in jail, and we'll all be rich as Croesus with the quantum financial system. Do you see that as possibly just a circus cover for a reboot by the powers that be?
I don't think the powers that be are that intelligent. I think that there's a tremendous amount of cunning, but not intelligence of this wisdom flame type, the stuff that steers the destiny of planets. But I just want to read from one of the notes that I received. With the 5G system coming online, you have effectively an electronic system that you can use to separate yourself from the Federal Reserve banking system. And this ultimately and very importantly yields the end of manipulation, which allows the value of gold to rise. Thus, this would counter the Federal Reserve death note. So 5G is what's...
Okay, Sacha.
Yep, we lost you for a second.
Gold bullion.
Sacha, turn off your sharing your screen. Somehow you managed to put the shared screen on.
Are you hearing me now?
We're hearing you now, but you've got you're sharing your screen. I believe it's your screen.
I didn't touch anything at all.
This happened to me the other day with Skype.
Strange.
Yeah, it is. So I don't even know where to tell you to get rid of it because they've changed the whole look of Skype.
Well,
I didn't touch the telephone at all. It's actually far from me. How weird! I'm connected to it by a wire only. So I'm not sure what to do.
I think it's your screen. It's
probably Mark's, not mine.
Somebody just put the executive order on coordinating. That was Mark. Okay, Mark, Mark's got his screen on. Mark, somehow or another, you got your screen on.
Yeah, I think that's just the window box. Not the screen's not on. You can't see me. I cannot see me. Can you see me?
Yeah, that's actually just a text box.
Just a text box.
So that's fine. That's not a problem.
No.
And our conversation is rolling on, and I know, Nancy, this is our break time, given that we are recording this and it will be aired on Wednesday. Do we need here at the hour break to...
No, we can keep going, but maybe they want a break.
No, I'm absolutely fine to continue and wrap this. Don't worry.
Okay, yeah, because I'm particularly interested in what you're talking about right now, Sacha, with how the quantum financial system, which is rumored to be ready to trigger any day now, that's been told for a long time, and of course it still hasn't happened yet. The question of how 5G, I've been told, could massively increase the power of AI with the launching of the 20,000 low-orbit satellites. And as Carrie Cassidy recently brought out, her whistleblower sources say there's already a massive nano-satellite network already in place. Is there a way, I seem to be hearing you saying this, Sacha, in which this might, if the harm of 5G was somehow neutralized, that this would have this decentralizing dynamic, working with blockchain to actually free us from the Fed families?
Absolutely, and that would cohere perfectly with divine geometry and the way that these things ultimately pan out. I mean, evil will unto itself. This is a cardinal law of the universe, and it's certainly in a binary universe. That is an assured outcome. Evil will unto itself. And if we look around us and see the signs which are crystal clear of tribulation, of end of days, of the apocalypse, the Armageddon, so to speak, it's not necessarily a bad thing. In point of fact, it's a very healthy thing. It's a very needful shedding of the skin in order that we can enter and engage an upliftment, an evolutionary upgrade. So I ultimately see all of this as being purposeful and needful and consequential. I'm not trapped in, despite the name of the film that I just put out, I'm not trapped in an apocalyptic mindset. I just think it's necessary that we recognize that we are at the end of days, and that the one thing that is required is the actualizing of our consciousness. And that ultimately is had by us revivifying relationship and communing with one another, stepping away from the artificialization of relationship, the dislocation and disconnection of relationship between humanity and the earth, which has happened in the last couple of thousand years with the realization of cityscapes and urban landscapes and the removal of living souls from the living soil. That needs to be addressed now. We need to remember who and what we are as a sentient species and step away from the monolithic, globalized collectivization that has been imposed upon us by systems, extraneous systems, which have been best represented through governments and churches.
Well, it's certainly jives with my own experience, the dynamic you're describing about evil will unto itself. If we look at all the audacious initiatives of the dark side, looking at 9/11, for example, that, as I think you said, I was seeing today the video on your website on humanitad.org, from your appearance at the panel on the Vatican. and talking about how, the war on terror essentially failed. 9/11
Yes.
was, this act of, spectacular dark magic, planetary spectacular dark magic, to trigger the war on terror, which, if it had succeeded, we would be living in a totally clamped down fascist reality right now. It's grim. It's, it's certainly, but it's not the outcome and the agenda that they envisaged when they pulled off that audacious act of dark magic. So that's the thing that I am hopeful about as well. And seeing that, for example, there's a trusted mystic, wisdom elder, I would call her, here in the mountains of Crestone, Colorado. Our friend Reverend Maya Nartumid, who has some very trustworthy, we'll call them inner planes sources, that her information and her take on it is that, yes, it is absolutely necessary for us, in partnership with Gaia, to give a worldwide no to this rollout, a worldwide awakening. It is absolutely essential for the redemption to happen, for the neutralization, and even the turning of this essentially evil weapons technology towards the integration of organic intelligence over artificial intelligence, to have organic intelligence with the aid of divine intelligence, to make AI, artificial intelligence, the servant of human freedom rather than its master. That's what I feel great hope about that.
I couldn't agree more from my perspective that's the clarion call that we're seeing, or that we ought to be seeing, with this outrage. That is sort of sweeping the sort of more liberal intellectual world. I'm not sure that a great many people in Botswana or Uruguay are fretting about 5G. This is the preserve of the liberal intellectual West, the very creature that has wrought so much suffering on the face of the earth over the last couple of thousand years of empire. So it's right and proper that we're the ones who need to be shaking ourselves down and recognizing the peril, the threat that has emerged on the backbone of what we've carved into this world through a 2,000-year patriarchy. It's probably even longer than that. Since the Great Deluge, arguably. But agreed, absolution, redemption, these are the signatures, these are the colors which really are represented in the geometry of now, of where we are right here, right now. We are forced into recognizing that everything in a sense is perfect and the outcome is assured, so long as we do not entrain our attention purely into the apocalyptic. It's fine to be spooked and scared into action. The question then is, what is the action? Where does the right action emerge from? My great frustration as a frontline activist is not seeing enough people getting on the front foot and walking out their front door like Mark Steele. Mark, to me, is the atom seed of Homo sapiens sapien, engaging in right action, taking on the system, saying, I do not grant permission, because remember one thing, vital to remember, that the sacrifice of innocence, the harvest of humanity, has only ever occurred by virtue of us giving permission to it.
Exactly. And when I think of Mark's story, I'd like to bring this into the larger context of your work with the ITNJ, with the International Tribunal for Natural Justice. This travesty of justice that Mark describes as having taken place just this last week in the UK, and the spectacular absence of any attention to it, of course, from mainstream media. Is there part of this story, when we look at the power of this story of humanity uniting in partnership with Gaia to protect the earth itself and her children, what is the place in this story of the work that you have done on the international level, particularly with the ITNJ? I've seen you've done a lot of meetings at the UN level with various leaders of various nation states, and in, for example, the work that you're doing, focusing on the human trafficking and child abuse. Where is the place in this of the story of an emergent planetary court of justice that could actually be seen to hold the cabal accountable? Because, there's the famous statement some British judiciary person a couple hundred years ago: justice must not only be done, but must be seen to be done. And the power of that, for lack of a better term, a perp walk,
Yes.
of somebody in handcuffs that nobody ever expected to see in handcuffs. The power of that, seeing justice perhaps begin to be done, or might even, the possibility of it beginning to be done.
Yeah.
Can you, in the context of Mark's story as well, can you share with us on that thought?
Yes, of course. I mean, it really comes down to a repurposing of the existing infrastructure, or at least those elements of the existing, of the status quo, which can be repurposed because they're worthy of repurposing. So can the International Court of Justice and the international juridical systems around the world, can they be repurposed? Invariably, the answer is yes, they can, and yes, they must be. Interpol is there mandated to do the bidding of the member states of the international community. So ultimately, Interpol can, must, and will fulfill its mandate when that mandate is properly adhered to. Again, it comes down to the rule of law. Our insistence on natural justice is that, and the reason why we've established the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, which is absolutely recognized around the world now increasingly, is because it is the only way forward when justice systems have become weaponized and are working at the behest of the corporatocracy or at the behest of corporations masquerading as governments. Then it is right and proper that good people of the world self-organize and establish and mandate a new juridical system or a new court system to prosecute and arbitrate. Now, although the International Tribunal does not prosecute per se, what we can do and what we will be doing, and this will bear out very shortly, incidentally, vis-a-vis the Mark Steele case, and we can't speak about what we're doing together there right now, because it is something, a process which is underway, and we cannot prejudice what we're doing. But we can, as an international tribunal, bring together the right law lords, the right academic and intellectual brains, and bring and even political and theological leadership, as well as galvanize grassroots consensus and support, and then bring that to bear and use that against the existing systems to force the existing systems to fulfill their mandates. So we can almost be assured that we can use any jurisdiction in the world under their own rules of engagement by forcing them to adhere to the rule of law. Look, most of the travesties of justice occur in the world because the people who are being assaulted by the justice systems don't have the money or the intellectual capability to counteract the weaponization of the law systems being used against them. And ultimately, it comes down to Socratic argument. Are we, as an international tribunal for natural justice, cleverer than a weaponized justice system that's operating on behalf of government or commercial governments? The answer is yes, categorically and absolutely yes. We are cleverer because not only do we understand law and can we enforce rule of law through that Socratic argument and maintaining a stand, but we also have the pulse of humanity in our veins, meaning to say right action and pure truth are on our side. And you couple right action and pure truth with an understanding and an insistence on the rule of law, and a victory is assured. So it is a process, and we're involved in that process. And Mark Steele's case is at the tip of the spear of that process.
Well, that's really encouraging for me to hear. This has been a focus for me for a number of years. I was a spokesman and helped to found the Sovereign Court of International Justice, which unfortunately I had to part ways with that organization about a year ago. It does not seem to be having an impact at this time. But for 5 years, that was very much a focus of my work. And for the people involved in that organization, the key always came down to meaningful enforcement, because no tyranny has ever surrendered its power voluntarily. And it can only be expected to be done under duress, under seizure of assets according to judgments, under prison terms, when it becomes, there is a preventive dynamic in place because of meaningful enforcement, using, fast-track mechanisms already in place, having people's credit ratings affected, having, multiple stock piling judgments one on top of the other as they ignore the court's legitimacy. That we went to a great deal of trouble to outline for all those who were interested in helping this come into reality that this court had teeth, that the cabal would wake up and face harm, seizure of assets, prison, disgrace, exposure. That in the absence of that kind of enforcement, we can issue judgments based on the divine law. We can raise awareness around the world. And in the meantime, they have the police, they have the guns, they have the media, they have the military, and their impunity just rolls on as it has. So I'd love for you to, if you can share with us anything thoughts you may have along that direction.
Very simply put, you're right in all you say, but please recall that amongst those infrastructures of policing and of military are good human beings with the pulse of humanity coursing through their veins. And it is precisely those brothers and sisters of ours who are wearing costumes and who are part of the technocracy that is assaulting humanity. There is an awakening taking place there. I know, because that echelon is one that I'm speaking to a great many times in the course of the work that I do. And the awakening that's happening there within the military-industrial complex, so to speak, and within the policing infrastructures, and even within the portals of governance, whether you're talking the United Nations or local and federal governments around the world, the awakening is palpable. I get a lot of letters from officials, a lot of letters from parliamentarians, a lot of letters from heads of agencies, not least of all in context with this 5G apocalypse film that just came out a little over a week ago. I've received letters from heads of policy making in some of the capitals of the world, health and science policy making institutes, who are writing and saying, we had no idea. We're arranging a screening of the film. So I'd suggest that the nefarious element, or the Babylonian priesthood, as I prefer to call it, is a very, very small and somewhat increasingly marginalized aspect of the status quo that we've given far too much of our attention to in recent days. Now, the real awakening that we should be encouraging, the flame that we should be fanning, the flickering flame that we should be fanning, is the one that is emerging in the hearts and minds of those police, those military brothers and sisters of ours.
I'm reminded of a friend of mine in Los Angeles, prominent figure in public health, working with the entertainment industry and getting accurate information, health information into primetime television programs. She was doing a focus on human trafficking and had extensive meetings with the FBI task force on human trafficking and the LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, task forces on human trafficking. And they let her know. They just said, here's what happens. We find the cases, we find the evidence, we work them up through the courts, and then we hit the ceiling of protection. Both FBI task force and LAPD said, this is what happens. And if you want to know what the two events are at which most cash changes hands for child sex trafficking, it is the Republican National Convention and, of course, the Democratic National Convention.
Yeah.
This is where these good men and women in the law enforcement agencies who are, simultaneously most likely appalled and deadened in their souls at a certain point once you've been exposed to so much of it, at the suffering that they see, at the violation of innocence. I once in a while I bring up to people, there are words in the gospel where Christ said, it were better for that man that a millstone be tied around his neck and he be cast into the uttermost depths of the sea than that he harm one of these little ones. Yeah. And so there are many good men and women out there who know that, who feel that, and who have dedicated their lives in law enforcement to trying to bring these people to justice.
Yes.
So this is very encouraging to me to hear what you're sharing about the communications to you on this level, because it was a great disappointment to me to see essentially 5 years of my work the service that I gave to try to make some meaningful enforcement happen. Unfortunately, there was a turn of events that made it clear that I could not participate in that anymore. So this is very encouraging. I was aware of the ITNJ from about 5 or 6 years ago, and aware of this enforcement question as being, in my mind, the key. So what you're describing now of this coming together, this reaching out of law enforcement men and women around the world, and particularly, that's the great service, ironically, of 5G. It's the unignorable wake-up call, and that will end up being a part of this story.
Yes.
Absolutely
right. Beautifully put. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Nancy, just want to call you in, and Mark too. Sacha and I have been in conversation for a bit here. Do you want to jump in with some thoughts on this?
Well, it's the theme that I keep going back to, is that at this point in the game, what's marginalized are these nation governments. They no longer should be even given the time of day. What people need to do is, like you say, walk out the front door. Go to your neighbors. Say, do you know that they're going to be putting these antennas in my neighborhood, our neighborhood? And do you know that our real estate's going to go down because they're not good, they're unhealthy? That we have to motivate at the local level. Now, it's happening. Where we're hearing the blowback is from cities. Cities, not counties, not states, cities. Sacha, is there some way that or maybe even Mark, I'm assuming that you probably have the same problem in Great Britain, is that because the mechanism of the government, the corporate government, the corporations, is not going to work for us, then let's just ignore them. Get away from their drama and just do our thing. And that's going to your neighbors. Does this resonate with you? And have you seen it working? Because you alluded to that there's a lot more yellow vest operations going on out there. And one nation, I think Israel, actually put a ban on the making of the yellow vests. They wouldn't let yellow vests be sold in their country.
Classic move by corporation governments, doing exactly what they do. Which is prevent the will of the people from ever manifesting in the temporal realm. Look, my concern is more, and my focus is more on forging the lance with which to pierce the heart of the dragon, so to speak. Mark is very much a part of that struggle, but Mark can speak probably greater than I can to how this is playing out on the street in terms of rallying minds and hearts in the neighborhood.
Well, the thing that we've done of late, which has caused an absolute hiatus in the government, and everybody seemed to get behind it. It's quite an interesting document, and what it is, it's an indict. It's a letter sent to anybody who promotes 5G anybody in government, any media people who basically promote it and don't tell the real dangers of it. And what that document actually states, obviously up till now, 5G was maybe something that people didn't realise that it was in fact a weapon system and probably pretty dangerous. However, since the 7th of February, when Blumenthal asked specific questions of the industry, they'd asked specific questions about the research and safety data surrounding 5G. They already had information to state that there wouldn't be, because obviously 5G, as we all know, is being developed as a weapon system, so it wouldn't pass any regulatory guidelines or tests. It wouldn't pass any safety data or any research data that was appertaining to it. We have the information for that and the evidence and the scientific and technical documents to prove that to be the case. And what he specifically asked the industry, where is the safety data on 5G? They came back on the 7th of February and have admitted the FCC, the FDA, because it's the FCC, International Test for Antennas, so they're regulated right across the world. So the FCC and the FDA and all the industry have stated there is none. That means that 5G is in fact in breach of the Nuremberg Code. It is experimental, it is illegal, it is an indictable offence for anyone who would have anything to do with it or roll it out or deceive people into thinking it's something that it isn't. It's what we did. We crafted a letter. It's at the saveusnow.org.uk website. I suggest people get it, download it and use it. You send that to anybody who's associated with 5G. Governments, doesn't matter if it's media, doesn't matter if it's businesses, companies, whatever. And in that document it states quite clearly, we now know that 5G is in fact an indictable offence. However, that crime currently, prior to that letter being read by the recipient, is potentially, it's a crime, but not a very serious matter. Any continuance of either the deception, the rollout, or any of your involvement in the rollout of this 5G, this deployment of a weapon system, you will show intent to harm. So it changes the whole prospect of the potential of someone going to jail. The difference between manslaughter or murder or an accident or an assault on anybody who's harmed by this technology. We have images of children bleeding from the nose being assaulted by this. We've got people with burns, skin burns, chest burns, anyone where they've getting close to these MIMO tanks. We've got people who've died of brain cancer, strokes, heart attacks, and cancers and other non-communicable diseases in Gateshead, where I believe the epidemiological data will show that 400 people have been murdered in this very small borough of Gateshead. Because obviously we've taken the data, the epidemiological data, that just does not match with the national trends that are particular to Gateshead and other areas that actually have this very similar and same technology. So we've seen death rates significantly higher, and I've approximated somewhere in the region of 400 people who've been murdered. It's genocide from this technology in Gateshead alone. So what we're saying to people, now that we all know where we are, now that we know this is a weapon, now we know that it has not passed any regulatory standards or tests and would fail any regulatory standards or tests, it's time to step away.
This is integral. Mark, can I just say, what you're saying is integral. And if people understand that, then we've won the war. It's about the wet ink signature. Because for those 400 souls who have perished that you're speaking to, or the 31 students in Bristol, as I understand it, connected to the university there, Bristol in England also being a testbed case for 5G, and the suicide of about 30 souls, I believe, young. Is that correct, students?
Yes. Well, we've got the number up. The number that's been published is 14. However, suicide rates, coroners are very averse to actually signing off a death as a suicide. So suicides are roughly, you'll see them reported by coroners, it's something like 30% of the real number. So we're talking closer to 40 children here, Sacha, who've committed suicide in Bristol since the rollout, since this experimental, illegal test on top of them.
So the point being here that whoever permissioned the implementation of that test bedding, it comes down to wet ink signatures, whether they are technocrats or bureaucrats or the health officials or environmental officials who are willful or ignorant to what they're doing. The point remains that there are wet ink signatures that mandated and ratified and permissioned that travesty or those travesties. And we must narrow down to those wet ink signatures and then drag those wet ink signatures under the lens into prosecutions. That is when you're going to see a seismic change, a sea change in the unconscious rollout of these kinds of technologies.
Absolutely.
Well, that is such a big piece because I have become very skeptical about whether something like that could happen. You know, how corrupt the justice system is, how this could be thwarted. You know, even with wet ink signatures and epidemiological evidence. But as you say, it's this rising awakening. You know, we are looking for those with enough conscience, with enough heart, who see clearly the evidence before them and are willing to take a stand. And if one takes a stand, another is inspired and encouraged to do so also. And just listening to both of you, for all of our listeners, it's got to be enormously inspiring and encouraging. It's really, you know, more than I hoped to hear this quickly when Nancy and I launched Radio 5G, that this quickly we could be having a conversation on this level and with so powerful a tool as you and your team have given us, Sacha, with 5G Apocalypse. Hope is definitely stirring.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah. You know, this reminds me of the 60s and the Vietnam War, because that was when people on the universities and colleges, you know, got to talking to one another and couldn't quite get our heads wrapped around all these people that are dying in Vietnam, mostly because we knew a number of them. Okay, it was a personal war. Somebody's got doing something in the background, got their mic open, scratching. Might be the mic on a shirt or something. But the thing that when you were talking about this just now, I just sort of had like a flashback, you know, because what really made the difference was for parents. I mean, you got parents that had come out of the Great War. You know, they were the ones that were the greatest generation. They had stopped the fascist movement through the world. I mean, just, you know. And so here we are saying, you know, we think there's a problem over here when you've got, you know the reasons for being in Vietnam. And, I apologize. So what happened was that we went into the streets. And at that time, you know, really nobody understood the full implications of it. So actual media, real media telling the real story were out there filming people, you know, just quietly protesting. And that got on the televisions, along with the television bringing the Vietnam War into their home. You know, I mean, that kind of thing. That there was a total turnaround. Not in the fact that my parents became activists, but my parents became more aware. By the time I graduated in 1970 from college, my class refused to go to the graduation ceremony. And so I'm telling my dad, you know, Dad, don't bother to come. I'm not going to go to this thing. And he said, why? And I said, well, because in all this time I'd never had this conversation with him. So I kind of blurp out the normal, you know, blah, 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 blah. And my father said to me, you know, I really wished you could make a difference, but you're not going to change anything. It wasn't that that man didn't understand it. He had no hope for change. And that's what I think we're giving people today, is the hope for change. You know, this is not a new thing. People have been thinking about this for a while. There's a lot of avenues.
Well, what I see happening last night, for example, here in this little mountain town where I live, there was a gathering of people who are working with some of the county-by-county restoration of the republic ideas. And when I look at it in the context of 5G, of people, you know, in cooperation with sympathetic law enforcement, county registrars, careful alignment with, you know, not doing anything provocative or violent or illegal, not being a Ruby Ridge or Waco rebellious, you know, we're establishing our own little state that's not paying taxes. None of that. That with that reclaiming of sovereign rights coming up against the 5G, as you say, Sacha, the $20 trillion momentum of the 5G rollout, that a crisis will be reached. And it reminds me of, you know, in the days leading up to the American Civil War, Lincoln said, I believe a crisis is coming that it will become all one thing or all the other. You know, that no nation can endure half slave and half free. It'll become all one or all the other. And it's just very, you know, when I look at the arc of the story and I imagine 5G cell towers rolling out in my neighborhood, and particularly with the awareness in this area, in this high valley of the Rocky Mountains, that when I imagine that playing out across America and across the world, because this movement is uniting. There are, you know, as Mark describes, the same citizen action in Gateshead that is also rolling out county by county using Anna von Reitz's work. There is going to come a crisis at which the soldiers and automatons and roboticized ones who are the puppets and soldiers of the cabal, in seeking to quash the emerging freedom of the people. It'll be Tahrir Square in Egypt when the soldiers finally refused to fire on the people. And that was the turning point when a police state collapsed. A friend of mine lived through both of the Egyptian revolutions. And he said the amazing thing that happened when the Mubarak regime collapsed in the wake of Tahrir Square, and the police state vanished overnight because none of the former members of the police state dared to show their faces on the street. And so what happened was that human nature came to the fore. People helped each other. People, neighborhood watch communities protected each other's homes. Muslims protected Christians while they prayed. Christians protected Muslims while they prayed. And he told me it restored his faith in human nature to see that unfolding. And this is somebody who'd been through some pretty nasty experiences in the military and intelligence communities. So that's my hope. That's the story arc that I see unfolding here. And hopefully we can use, you know, the nonviolent strategies that have succeeded over the course of the last 100 years or so between, you know, Gandhi and Dr. King. Maybe you are familiar with, Sacha, with the work of Professor Eugene Sharp in his book From Dictatorship to Democracy, which is sort of a handbook of resistance against tyranny around the world. That is certainly the work that I'm dedicated to and want to join those such as yourself who are doing such great work with the ITNJ.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that regaling us with that wonderful cameo on history as well. Look, the same thing occurred with the Romanian Revolution, and you know, the time of the Caesars of old, when they could no longer, they had didn't have the gold coin to pay their centurions, one fine day, the soldiery put down their arms and actually they move against the kings and the priests at a given point in a civilizational acme or apogee, and actually it's a nadir, it's a low point, isn't it? Really, we're describing, but that's where we're at, in my view. I've had sufficient conversations at the highest point of leadership, as I said, politically, theologically, in academia, and so on, to know absolutely in my own mind that we've reached that nadir point in this particular tailspin of a civilization. And indeed, all we're seeing now is the emergence of that human flame. And it's a beautiful thing to behold. That's the truth.
Yes, and when we look at India, for example, I remember reading that at the height of the Raj in the British Empire's control of India, I suppose we're talking early 20th century, the population of India was some 300 million, 350 million at that time. And India was kept in subjugation by 10,000 British bureaucrats and soldiers.
Wearing pith helmets, extraordinary.
Yes, symbol of authority, mate. Right.
And fly switches, yes, exactly.
Yeah, it was, as you say, a dream spell, right? That Gandhi and others.
Yes, and the subject, as well, Gandhi's wonderful satyagraha, non-violent movement, really changed the paradigm in a sense. But yes, what you've just alluded to is it was an extraordinary epoch. And to consider that subjugation has actually moved into the quantum with modern society, whereupon 6 to 7 billion souls are enslaved, bonded, and indentured at the behest of arguably only a clutch of Babylonian deviants. I imagine that the real globalist enterprise or the invisible mastery is no more than a few dozen individuals. But the way that the Jesuitical campaign and Vatican campaign and Anglo-American corporate campaign have rolled out with the protocols of usury and indentureship and registration of souls and of land and of titles and deeds, all of that stuff, which is really the 3D harvest of humanity, has brought us to this point where everything is now owned by the fiction, or at least we're led to believe that the fiction owns and controls the living. Well, I have news for that particular behemoth. The living is emerging again, and that roaring inferno will be unabated in our generation.
I would love to ask Nancy to share something with us. I don't know whether you and Mark are aware of that aspect of Nancy's work having to do with shungite and protection against EMF and 4G, and the phenomenal nature of the shungite field as a gift of Gaia, as the fullerene molecule and its mysterious connection to the quantum field, and how the healing dynamic, the protective and healing dynamic that has been scientifically studied, particularly in Russia, of course, which is where shungite, the only deposit on the planet, the massive one in Karelia, exists. Nancy, does it feel appropriate to you? We know, of course, we want to state up front, shungite as we know it now does not protect against 5G. But in terms of this planetary awakening, would you speak to that?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Okay, the concept we were talking about earlier with the connection, the metamorphic concept of energies that are the same resonate with other energies that are the same, creating weaves of energy around the planet. Well, there's a weave of shungite around the planet, and I've been in the mineral business for, long time, and I've never seen a mineral take over like this one did. It normally, they'll come on, and for a few months they've got some trending, but this is going on for my 5th year, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, because what's happening, it's like 5G. It's a focus of humanity. Suddenly there's this black stone that seems to be able to purify water, that seems to be able to keep radiation even and other toxins and black mold out of buildings, that can cause people who have had diseases for years and years to suddenly become miraculously cured. Now, when I first got into the business in 2014, the first thing I came across was the Russians saying that shungite is the medicine of the 21st century. And then they would also say, and it will one day be worth more than gold in weight. And, I went, oh, well, this is a pretty big, but I know, because I've done 5 years of research into this, that they knew it from a scientific way. Because just like they looked at the 90% of the DNA instead of the 10%, they looked at the magic behind the shungite, the enerology, the energy science that's behind it. And so I know that the science is true. It just keeps building and building from that aspect. But at the same time, you have millions and millions of people around the world who are working with shungite, feeding that grid even more. To the point that I've said to them, you don't need shungite in your life. You have to be able to access the energy of the shungite grid. And I just got an email from somebody saying that, yes, I ordered it and it's on its way, but I remembered you saying that. So I said to the shungite grid, I said, please, I hate shopping, but would you make it a wonderful day? And she went out and she had a wonderful day. That people are taking a new level of consciousness growth as they begin to understand that a mineral can do all this. What is this about? So it's amazing to see this permeating throughout the world. It will change everything regarding 4G and regarding a whole lot of other things. But it's not something that can stop 5G. And my position on this isn't because I don't think we can make some kind of super duper device to stop the 5G. It's because it's the protection of the biosphere itself. The 5G, I don't care if you're going to make it into a good thing or a bad thing. Either way, you're affecting the microorganisms in the soil all the way up to every tree and everything that's alive. And, I really think that that's what we have to think in terms of, is that it's 4G, we can fix it. Okay, we can fix it without taking down the technology. We've proven this. But the 5G is a focal point. Even if you tell me that they can make it into something good, I'm not going to tell anybody that. I don't want to give them an out. You have no out. You have no out.
Agreed.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I couldn't agree more with you, Nancy. It was wonderful the way you described it. But the antidote to 4G being shungite, but the antidote surely to 5G is not an externalized totem like a mineral, which has definitely got consciousness to it and a remedial consciousness. But consider that the remedial consciousness to 5G, 6G, 7G is the human psionic consciousness. I'm certain of this in my own mind, and that's just where we seem to have been brought again with divine geometry to this extraordinary point in which there is nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. Everything is at stake.
That is absolutely the truth of it. It's like this feeling that we all have that we're going to win because we already won. It's that type of thing. Right. But we have to have a story. This is what I've come to understand, is we have to create a story of how we got there.
Yes, that's beautiful, Nancy. That's beautiful.
So what's our story? Okay, our story is
the Vatican's creating the story for you, or has been for 2,000 years.
Well, I left the church a long time ago. We got a story here, and so what I see the story as being is that 5G is a focal point for getting everybody to stand up. Because as I'm going through and listening to this kind of conversation that we've had, what comes about as my final takeaway is, okay, we have to give the excuse to all these people that are ingrained in this system to do what's right. They want to do what's right, but they don't have the excuse to do it. We've got to give them that. And the
Yes,
other
indeed.
and the other thing is like Marcus found out, is that we have to call each individual into accountability. That's why you take and you say to somebody, look, right now you're only sort of in trouble, but if you continue along this path, you're going to go to jail, or you're going to lose your home, or it's not a good thing. Don't do this,
Yes.
okay? All right? So you're calling each person into accountability. But I say we've got to take it further. We have to call each and every person into accountability. Please stand up. That's all you have to do. And say, no.
More than say no. Go on the front foot and walk out of your front door and march
Walk out of the
on
door.
the Citadel.
That's
Yeah.
right. Sit in the street in your front yard and yell to your neighbors, you better get out here because they're going to cream us.
Yeah, and the magic bullet we talked about yesterday in our conversation with Dean Henderson, if you want to get people's attention, and they're not necessarily tuning in this program or Project Camelot, or haven't seen your documentary, Sacha, you point out to them, studies are showing children are suffering neurological impairment, and are you aware that the value of your property is going to go down when families come around shopping? Are you aware, that you talk to real estate agent networks, and that, I'm sorry to have that be the main motivating factor, but it'll get people's attention pretty quickly. If you say, look, your mortgage is going to be underwater if you don't join with us and stop this from coming to our neighborhood, because families aren't going to want to buy your house because you're 200 feet from a 5G cell tower. And, if that's what it takes, rather than, children with nosebleeds, neurological impairments, heart attacks, stroke, miscarriages, bee colony collapse of the biosphere. We'll start wherever we can, and that's one that, will cut across a lot of spectrums right now. Well, we're coming up a few minutes away from the conclusion of our time here, and this has been an amazing conversation. I am just so glad to have had the privilege of Mark Steele and Sacha Stone with us, with myself and Nancy. We are, as it happens, all going to be conversing again quite soon with our friend Carrie Cassidy on Project Camelot. And I was just particularly pleased at the opportunity for this initial conversation, for us to begin to see these areas of focus, for the power of the tool that Sacha has given us with the documentary, and to keep our focus on Mark Steele and the unfolding travesty of justice in the UK. I'm so encouraged, Sacha, to hear that you are working, that you and the ITNJ are working with Mark, as you say, the tip of the spear in bringing all this out. I'd like to give each of you a chance to say, some final thoughts and words. Mark, do you have any last things you want to emphasize with us today?
Well, really to reiterate, but what I'd like to do is congratulate Sacha, because I've not a chance yet on the film. We haven't spoke on the phone for a bit. So I'd just like to congratulate you, Sacha. It's a fantastic piece of evidence put together in a very, very layperson's way. I can get very, very technical sometimes. Sacha, I'll tell you, probably cut a lot of it out of that video, because not only can people have difficulty understanding the accent, they also have difficulty understanding the technicalities. So well done, Sacha. I'd like to congratulate you and your team on that. It's a fantastic piece of...
Thank you, Mark. That's very kind. Well, in turn, I thank you for bringing this to our attention some months ago, and the New Earth team and I have had, let's say, an interesting ride learning increasingly about this stuff, and the beautiful story that emerges when one gets to grips with it and doesn't get fixated again on the apocalyptic or the nefarious aspects of this storyline, but begin to see that it's a far greater trigger for awakening, as Nancy, you've gone to great pains to express so beautifully. And you as well, Michael. Delightful meeting both of you, and I look forward to tomorrow.
Well, and for everyone listening, we very much encourage you to go on YouTube and with the search terms 5G Apocalypse, Extinction Event, the stunning documentary from Sacha Stone on the rollout of 5G. Also for Mark Steele's work with the Save Us Now movement in the UK. And for us here at Radio 5G, we are a hub for information and action, awakening and action on the rollout of 5G. If you go to 5G-know.com, 5G-know.com, we have a wealth of information, a lot of contacts to all the effective Stop 5G movements around the U.S. and globally as well. And we will also be having a conversation with renowned investigative journalist, our good friend Kerry Cassidy on Project Camelot. And that will be airing, by the time you're hearing this will have aired on Friday, the 5th of April. That's tomorrow because we're taping this in advance. We encourage you all to listen to this conversation again if you wish on the YouTube of Radio 5G. And Nancy, do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us today?
I just want to honor, both of you people. Your work is astounding. You just put hope in my heart. And, we'll be together again, I'm sure. We should do monthly updates or something because it's changing so fast.
Very, very happy to do that, and I'm certain that Mark feels the same way until this existential threat is no longer in existence.
Yes,
right.
Yes. Let's just plan on trying to get that done because, again, it's all information. We have to give them the excuse to do the right thing. So, thank you again, Michael. Thank you so very much, and everybody out there, just be safe, be blessed, and let's see you next time.
Right, Gaia's and her children are winning and will win. God bless us, everyone. Bye for now, folks.